Chapter 4. Kent. I didn't realize how tense I was until I was alone again. The drive back to my place felt longer than it should have, the city blurring past while my mind stayed stuck on the same stretch of road, on the way she'd looked at me when I refused to answer her questions, on the edge in her voice, on the irritation that had seemed to come from nowhere. It didn't make sense. Arya had always been easy to read, straightforward, honest to a fault. If something bothered her, she said it plainly. If she was upset, it showed. Today felt different, like she'd been testing boundaries I didn't know existed. I parked and sat there for a moment longer than necessary, hands still on the wheel. What was that about? Her questions replayed themselves in my head, one after the other, piling up without resolution. Won't you ask if I have a boyfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? Do you even date? It wasn't like her. At least not the version of her I thought I knew. I told myself it was just age. 22 comes with a certain restlessness, a need to assert independence, to push against the people who've always been there, just to see if they move. That had to be it. Still, something about the way she'd looked at me, frustrated, almost challenging, sat wrong in my chest. Not because it meant anything, because I didn't understand it. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, the quiet of my house wrapping around me. This place was the opposite of Steve's, minimal, orderly, untouched by years of family noise. I liked it that way, needed it that way. I set my keys down and rubbed a hand over my face. The necklace flashed briefly in my mind, the way it rested against her skin, the way she'd smiled like it mattered more than it should have. I pushed the thought away. That was just gratitude. She was grateful. That was all. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring at nothing. The conversation with her father from the night before crept back in, uninvited, unwelcome. She's grown. He'd said it casually, proudly. I hadn't argued that part. What unsettled me now wasn't the fact that Arya was grown. It was the possibility that I hadn't adjusted my expectations accordingly, that I was still responding to her like she was the same girl who needed rides and reminders, and maybe she was reacting to that. That made more sense than anything else. Her insistence on calling me by my name, her pointed questions, her irritation when I shut things down. She was asserting herself. That was normal. I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax. She didn't mean anything by it. If she had a boyfriend, I would have known. Not because it was my business, but because patterns change. Schedules shift. People glow differently when they're attached to someone. Arya hadn't changed in that way, so her questions weren't confessions. They were curiosity, maybe even annoyance. And I had handled it the only way I knew how, by keeping things where they belonged. Separate, appropriate, safe. Still, as I moved through my quiet house, the image of her stepping out of the car lingered. The way she'd paused, like she wanted to say more. The way she'd walked away without looking back. I told myself not to read into it. She was 22, figuring things out, testing limits, and I was just the unfortunate target of that energy because I'd always been there. Nothing more, nothing less. By the time night settled in, I'd convinced myself I'd imagined the weight of the moment, that tomorrow would reset everything back to normal. I didn't yet understand that normal had already shifted, and that Arya had noticed long before I did.
Arya. The house was quieter than it had been all day. Most of the lights were off, and I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling walls. My bedroom felt suffocating in its stillness. I had tried to sleep, tossing and turning, counting the shadows that stretched across my ceiling. But nothing worked. My mind kept going back to this morning, the car ride, the questions, the way he'd looked at me without saying a word. Uncle Kent. The thought alone made my chest tighten in a way I didn't fully understand. Finally, unable to stay in bed any longer, I slipped into the hallway and padded quietly down the stairs. The soft carpet muffled my steps, but the house was so still that it sounded loud. I found my father at the dining table, a half-empty mug of coffee before him, documents spread out like a fortress. The lamplight hit him from above, warm and familiar, making the house feel slightly safer. "I thought you were asleep," he said, looking up as I approached. There was a softness in his voice, a kind of surprise that felt more parental than scolding. "I couldn't," I admitted, sliding into the chair across from him. Too many thoughts. I tried to sound casual, but I knew my voice betrayed me. He studied me for a moment, his eyes sharper than usual. Then, almost as if he had been waiting for me, He leaned back in his chair and said, "I wanted to talk to you. Since you're here." I raised an eyebrow, suddenly alert. He rarely initiated serious conversations this late. "I'll be going away on a trip," he continued matter-of-factly. "It might take a while before I get back." I felt my stomach twist slightly. This wasn't unusual. He traveled often for work, but his tone carried weight. I couldn't ignore. "So," he paused, picking up one of the papers in front of him like it gave him courage. "I want you to be in Kent's care while I'm gone. He'll have to move in here for a while until I get back." The words hit me like a sudden gust of wind. My mind immediately replayed everything from earlier that morning. The gift, the car ride, his calm, unreadable expression, the tension that had lingered long after he'd dropped me off. "No," I said before thinking, sharper than I intended. "Absolutely not." He lifted a hand, sighing softly, patient but firm. "Arya, I know you may think that's awkward, but he's the only one I trust. If anything were to happen while I'm gone, Kent is the one person I know will protect you, keep you safe." I wanted to protest further, to tell him that nothing about him moving in would be just normal, that I didn't know how to handle him this close after this morning, after everything. But the weight in his eyes, the calm authority of his voice, left me momentarily speechless. "You're right," I admitted softly, forcing myself to nod. I understand." He smiled, the kind of smile that softened years of worry and responsibility into something almost tender. "Good. I know it won't be easy for you, but I need to know you'll be looked after, and I trust him. That's enough for me." I exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from my shoulders, though unease still lingered in my chest. I gave him a small, resigned nod, realizing there was no arguing further. "All right," I murmured almost to myself. He reached across the table then, gently brushing my hand with his. "Good night, Arya. Be careful while I'm away. And I love you, you know that." "I love you too, Dad," I said quietly, leaning forward to kiss him on the cheek. The warmth of that simple gesture grounded me in the safety of home, the familiarity of family, the trust I had in him. I left the table feeling the weight of responsibility settle around me. Kent would be here soon, and I knew, in the quiet corners of my mind, that the calm of tonight would be nothing compared to the tension his presence would inevitably bring. But for now, I let myself breathe.
Chapter 6. Kent. No. The word came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take it back. I stood in my kitchen with my phone pressed to my ear, staring out the window like the night had answers for me. Steve's voice crackled through the line, tired, insistent, carrying the weight of a man who didn't ask for help unless he had no other choice. "She's 22, I said again, calmer this time. "Not a child. You don't need someone living with her." "I know she's grown," Steve replied. "This isn't about that." "It sounds like it is." I dragged a hand down my face, already feeling the tension coil in my chest. I didn't like where this conversation was going. I didn't like how quickly my instincts were telling me to shut it down. "I can check in on her," I continued. "I'll come by. Make sure everything's fine. She doesn't need a guardian." There was a pause on the other end, long enough to make me uneasy. "Kent," Steve said quietly, "I'm not asking you to babysit. I'm asking you to be there." I exhaled through my nose, irritation flaring. "That's the same thing." "No, it's not," he said. "It's about safety, about routine, about knowing that if something goes wrong, someone I trust is under the same roof." I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge harder than necessary. "Move in?" I repeated. "Steve, that's crossing a line." "What line?" he asked. "You've been part of her life since she was a baby. Your family." That word landed wrong. Family didn't move into each other's houses like this. Family didn't feel this tightness in the chest at the thought of proximity. "She doesn't need me hovering," I said. "And frankly, neither of us need the discomfort." "She didn't seem uncomfortable growing up with you around," Steve replied. "You've always been good to her, protective. She listens to you." That was precisely the problem. "I'm gone longer this time," Steve continued. "And I can't relax knowing she's here alone. You're the only person I trust with her, Kent, the only one." Silence filled my kitchen. I stared at the floor, jaw clenched, my mind running through every rational argument I had left, every reason this was a bad idea. Every instinct telling me something about this arrangement felt wrong. "She's not a baby," I said again, but the words lacked conviction now. "I know," Steve said gently. "She's a young woman. And that's exactly why I need someone steady around, someone who won't let things get out of hand. I closed my eyes. That's strange. Unsettled feeling from earlier in the day crept back in. The car ride. Her questions. The way she'd looked at me like she was waiting for something. I didn't know how to give. I don't like this, I admitted. I wouldn't ask if I didn't need to, Steve replied. Please. I sighed, long and heavy. Fine, I said finally. I'll stay. Relief rushed through the line immediately. Thank you. I knew I could count on you. Don't thank me yet, I muttered. This isn't a good idea. He laughed softly, misunderstanding entirely. You're overthinking. It's temporary. Temporary. That word did nothing to calm the unease in my gut. After we hung up, I stayed where I was. Phone still in my hand, staring into the quiet of my apartment. My place, my control, my distance, all things I was about to give up. I told myself it was just responsibility, loyalty, doing right by my best friend. But the truth sat heavier than I wanted to admit. I had a bad feeling about this, and I didn't ignore instincts like that lightly.
Chapter 7. Arya. I paced my room like the floor might give me answers if I walked it enough times. Back and forth, window to door to mirror, mirror back to the bed. Calm down, I muttered under my breath. You're being ridiculous. Nothing had happened. Nothing. I pressed my palms together, breathing in slowly, forcing myself to stay grounded. He'll act like nothing happened, I told myself, because nothing did happen. I had asked a few questions. That was it. People asked questions all the time. God, why was I so nervous? I let out a frustrated laugh and ran a hand through my hair. I'm a freaking fool, I whispered. I just asked a question. That was the truth. Or at least the version of it I was clinging to. Dad had already left. His room was empty. His presence gone in that way that made the house feel larger and quieter all at once. Too much space. Too much time to think. Kent would be here soon. The thought alone made my stomach twist. I checked my phone. No message. No missed call. I didn't know why I'd expected one. He wasn't the kind of man who announced his arrival. He just showed up, solid, unavoidable. I hated how aware I was of everything now. The necklace resting against my skin. The sound of my own breathing. The way my heart seemed to speed up without permission. Get it together, Arya. I forced myself to sit on the edge of my bed, counting to 10. By the time I reached 7, headlights swept across my window. My chest tightened. He was here. I waited until I heard the front door open. The low thud of his shoes against the floor. The familiar sound of him setting his keys down. Everything about him felt heavy, grounded in contrast to the way I felt like I was floating, untethered. I stepped out into the hallway. Kent? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked up, expression neutral, unreadable. Hey, just that, no awkwardness. No tension, at least none he was willing to show. I swallowed. The guest room's right there, I said, pointing across the hall from my bedroom. It's already made up. He followed my gesture, then shook his head. I'll take the one at the end of the hall. The farthest one. Oh, I said before I could stop myself. It makes more sense, he added calmly. More privacy. Privacy. The word landed harder than it should have. Yeah, I said, forcing a nod. Of course. That makes sense. He picked up his bag and walked past me without another word. Boots quiet against the floor. I stood there longer than necessary, staring down the hallway as his door closed softly behind him. It shouldn't have hurt. But it did. I retreated back into my room and closed the door, leaning against it as if it might give way otherwise. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to my chest. This was going to be hell. Not because of anything he would do, but because of everything he wouldn't. He would keep his distance, act like nothing had changed, treat me like I was invisible in all the ways that mattered, and I would have to live with that. For months, I buried my face in my hands, heart racing with nerves I refused to name. Get over it, I told myself. It's just a crush. Still, as I locked my door and crawled into bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, one thought echoed louder than the rest. How was I supposed to survive being this close to him, when he was doing everything in his power to stay far away?